Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні. У нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар.
Welcome everyone into Garden Views, and this is an interesting episode. This is our first ever live broadcast. It was unplanned. We just sort of made a call. So for those of you seeing this show and being shocked at my appearance, sorry, this is me. But had I planned on doing this live, I probably would have put on a real shirt. Maybe not. Who knows? Anyway, for those of you on audio, it's meaningless. Just know that we did it live, and that's that. And hopefully you'll receive well. Anyway, my guest this week is Peter Taluk. He is actually an old friend of mine. I've known him since 1992, maybe 91.
91.
Yeah. He was actually a transfer, as I recall, from some California law school. Was it Pepperdine?
It was Pepperdine.
Pepperdine, yes. All right. Yeah. And transferred to my Loyola University of Maryland School of Law, which I think is now called the Carey School of Law. Peter came in. He was immediately smarter than everyone, so wanted to hate him, but he turned out to be like really cool, an excellent pool player. And that's not what this is about. But we're going to talk. But obviously, his biography comes into it. So first of all, Peter, thank you for joining us, and thank you for agreeing ad hoc on a whim to go live as well.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, for having me. It's wonderful to see you again after so many years, and thank you for the opportunity to be on your show.
No, thank you for agreeing to do this. And folks, you're going to find out why soon. But Pete, if you will, if you could just give a little bit of your biography, your educational background, your professional background, and I think that'll dovetail nicely into the purpose of this show.
Okay. Well, I was born and raised in Baltimore, out on the east side of in Baltimore County. Did undergrad at LaSalle University for economics and Russian. Did a graduate degree at University of Pennsylvania for government administration, and then spent one glorious year out in Malibu at Pepperdine Law, and then transferred back to Maryland. I decided I wanted to be more on the East Coast, and came back to my hometown to Maryland Law School, where I finished up, and instead of staying out on the East Coast, I spent between my second and third year of law school doing one summer classes in Scotland. But secondly, I took the opportunity in 1992 to go to Ukraine, which was just newly independent. It had declared independence in August of 1991. So I went out to Ukraine to, quote unquote, check it out and see what was going on there. Wound up doing volunteer work at the Advisory Council for the Ukrainian Parliament. Came back, finished law school, was all set to clerk in Washington, D.C. And the law firm that I had been in contact with basically called me during my bar exams and said, hey, are you interested in coming back out to Ukraine? And so 1993, I packed 5 bags and went out and joined Baker McKenzie out in Kiev.
Baker McKenzie is a huge international firm, right?
It's the largest global law firm. Maybe not by numbers right now, but by offices. And at that time, it was, But it's a pretty big global brand. And it was a lot of fun in the early '90s doing law out there, which was basically advising. at that time, it was purely international clients that wanted to do kind of business in Ukraine. So, just to give you some kind of flavor of it, we didn't even have a networked system. The laws were basically, there was a library with various materials where the librarian would cut out the new amendments that had been published in one of the two official newspapers and kind of place them into the binders there. So there was no LexisNexis and Westlaw as we had kind of learned how to use in law school. It was all kind of done by hand. We still had the
scrapbooking.
We still had scrapbooking. We still had the little floppy disk where we take from office to office in order to edit documents, before we sent them out to clients. But anyway, so I worked there for 4 years. Came over with Baker to their Dallas office, worked there a year. Wanted to stay for a little while longer. There was some confusion inside the law firm as to whether or not they wanted me in Dallas or not. And I started applying to various firms in the East Coast, and wound up, I don't know how, but I wound up falling in with Covington and Burling in Washington, D.C.
Another gigantic firm.
Yeah, it's still it's one of the premier firms. I was shocked. I think I was the only Maryland grad in there. I kind of did my research, and how they took me, I have no idea. And
I just want people to understand that you're a smarty pants big shot.
No, I was actually. It was interesting going in, thinking you were the dumbest person there in the whole office, and then. We were representing a client, and a 1-week limited due diligence project turned into a small IPO in Australia. And then that client, which was in the tech sector, asked me to come over, be their general counsel. I hopped over there, which in hindsight, in one respect, was a big mistake because it was during the tech boom, and then it was during the tech bust right around 2000. And then while we were going through either teetering on or going through bankruptcy, I heard that Philip Morris International was looking for an attorney out in Ukraine. I called a friend of mine and I said, I heard who was in the marketing department. And he said, well, I was sitting next to this woman on the plane. And I said, well, good, give me your number. And he laughed, and he's trying to be a good corporate guy. He says, well, send me your resume. And I said, Peter, I said, Karen, I knew when she was still Karen Handelsman, and her husband is Thomas Moore, and now she's Karen Handelsman Moore. Now her husband is a partner at Baker McKenzie. It does real estate. She used to be an associate with me, and when she was in Moscow when I was in Kiev. So anyway, long and short of it was, I called her. She told me what they were looking for. I was skeptical, but they had a huge, probably about that time, a $500 million business in Ukraine. And I said, Karen, there's one person in the world that fits what you're looking for, and sorry, it's me. And so next weekend I fly out to Switzerland, wait 3 months, got hired, went back with Philip Morris, was with them from 2002 until 2006. Then decided to go back into private practice. I worked with a small firm that was affiliated with Squire Patton Boggs. At the time, it was Squire Sanders and Dempsey. They asked me to come on to be their managing partner and to rebuild up their office. We did that for about 10 years. Then things weren't going so well. They wound up shuttering up their office there. I worked with a couple of local Ukrainian firms. I also did a stint as a senior advisor to the Minister of Economy for about 9 months over in Ukraine. So, and then last year, I moved to the wonderful state of Ohio, which was purely driven by the need for, my son was hitting high school, and this seemed to be the ideal area to bring him to high school, to allow him to both flourish academically, get some kind of good grounding in life, and also to play basketball. He had one point asked me, he's like, where did you go to high school, Dad? And I said, I went to Calvert Hall. And he looked it up. He's like, oh, you guys were pretty good in basketball. And I said, we were the #1 team in the nation in 1982. So, Sorry, Kate, you're not going there yet. You've only played a couple of years. You're not
Right.
going to handle the coast basketball. So, been out here in Ohio since July of last year, end of July last year, and most recently, been looking around for work things to do. My wife and youngest daughter stayed over in Ukraine. That was until about February of this year, and then the proverbial shit hit the fan. I happened to be over in February. We got some warning from the State Department. We left. We came back here, and my wife said, "I can't stay here," because she was working over there for a multinational company, and so she flew back against my
Let's put a
advice.
pin in that for a second.
Yep.
Was your wife from Ukraine? Did you meet her there?
My wife is from Ukraine. She's a Ukrainian citizen, and she just got her immigration visa 4 weeks ago, and will be next time entering the U.S. as a legal permanent resident. We never had, quite honestly, we've been married 15 years, but it was never in the cards just to get a green card, just to come on over, because I said, I don't know if I'm moving back. We might be moving back, we might not be moving back, but why go ahead and go through the process and then and then not move back. But once I moved back, and then she came back with me in February, she went back to Ukraine. She literally arrived on the evening of February 23rd, and woke up to bombs in Kiev on February at 4 a.m. on February 24th.
Now, in frivolity, you still say Kiev, but what we've been told it's supposed to be
Kiev. It's Kiev. I'm sorry, it's Kiev. I write it in the proper way, but
I just want to say the right thing. So your wife woke up to bombs in Kiev, and she actually had a pretty harrowing time of getting out of Kiev, and then she go east, and then she had to come back west again and go through Poland. Can you tell a little bit about that story?
Yeah, she basically she first moved out of the city to a friend's house, which was a little bit in the southern western portion, and so she was happily in this friend's house, and he was a former CEO of a couple very large companies in Ukraine, and they were happy there, a well-stocked house, and I kept saying, I think you should move. She kept saying, no, he doesn't really want to move. And then I think day 3, there was a bomb that fell in an oil refinery, which was about 20 kilometers. So it's about 11, 12 miles north of them. And she decided she was going to move. They hopped into a car. And interesting story, my wife was driving, and she went basically south to her the house where her mother and grandmother grew up in, and the family still has the house out in the village. She drove through the night, and at one point called me. She says, "We're here," and I said, "Everything okay?" She says, "Yeah, I was wondering why the roads were so clear." And then she realized she was driving all during martial law. She wasn't supposed to be on the road. So she was getting some kind of funny looks. She said every guard post when she'd pull over, and it was a woman driving, so she was behind the wheel. Our friend is he's originally from Russia. He's a Russian Jew that switched his citizenship to Ukrainian citizenship back in 2015 after the invasion, and because he couldn't say certain things in the Ukrainian language, certain kind of code words, my wife says, "You sit in the passenger seat, right. Let me do all the talking, and we'll get you to where we got to go." So that's how she got there, and spent about another 3-4 days going west to Lviv, and then stayed in Lviv for about a week until I finally convinced her to get out, and she made a run across the border, and got on a plane. It was in Poland. She didn't know exactly. I was trying to ask her. I said, "Can you tell me exactly where you're going through?" And she said, "I can't because my friend has set me up, and it's the it's the Israeli embassy is actually getting this bus out of here, and they're not telling us where we're going. We're getting into Poland, and then she said it was an interesting ride because at one point she said the driver seemed very rude to people because everybody's got questions. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? He says, I got to get to Warsaw, and he's been, stone-faced or rude the whole time, and then they finally pull up into a field, and he says, you can get out. She says, how do I get to Warsaw? He says, walk down over here, and there will be volunteer buses. And she said there was like a wonderful group of volunteers, people in vans, cars, and whatever. You got to go to Warsaw, hop in, drove her up to Warsaw. She spent the night there and got on a plane the next day and flew to Chicago. So that's where I went and picked her up. So
why was the Israeli embassy involved in this?
Oh, because my friend Peter Chernyshov has a lot of contacts there. So
okay, right. So it was for him. So he said the risk was worth it. He was the reward and the risk. Okay.
No, he wasn't a risk. He's a very good friend, and he's extremely helpful. And
no, I mean the risk of the Ukrainian guards thinking he was a Russian infiltrator.
No, that was more my wife's concern with when they're driving through he didn't actually leave the country. He wound up staying in. An interesting story. His wife, who was out of the country, paid a surprise visit back to him in Lviv, and we're very close with respect to our families. And my wife, was at one point I was talking to her. She's like, I got to go because Lisa's outside the door, and so my wife told me the story later that Peter's wife didn't want him to know that she was coming back into country, and she basically was contacting my wife and saying, okay, I'm going to come back in on such and such a date. And then she called her and said, walk outside right now. I'm standing outside, let me in. And basically surprised her husband and just kind of walking into the apartment and saying, I'm back. I know it's a war going on. I was just I forgot if she was in Israel or France, but she basically just turned up back in Lviv. So
that's your question about the background. Like, so for you said February 24th, that's the day the bombs started. It's been about 4 months since then.
Yep.
How was the feeling in Ukraine on the, firsthand accounts? Because, in the news, people were reporting that everyone in Ukraine's like, it's not going to happen. Don't worry about it. But, they were also saying, but they're also making their defenses, which seems true. But I mean, your wife was there on the ground. Other people, were there on the ground. Did they think it was a bluff or did they think it was going to happen?
I think there was a large feeling that it wouldn't happen. There was part that was concerned because, this isn't a new war. It started in 2014 with the invasion of eastern Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. So in eastern Ukraine, in the Donbas region, as it's called, that war has been going on since 2014. With the accumulation of all the tanks and troops, I think there was about estimation of 175,000 to 200,000 troops at the time. But people were still fairly skeptical, and even one of my close friends, who's now a battalion commander out in the east, I was talking to him, I think in January, and I remember talking to him, and I said, so do you think they're going to invade? And he says, no, they won't invade. They'll just sword rattle. Of course, they'll keep the war going on the east, but there's no way they're going to come into the center part of Ukraine or go after the capital city. So that was quite a surprise, I think, to most people. Though I think the Ukrainian government, my best guess is they were extremely concerned and probably knew about it. I think the U.S. government and the British government and others also probably were extremely concerned that it was going to happen.
We seem to be more worried about it than Ukraine was based on the media. It sounds like that's been confirmed. But I remember I would listen to various podcasts and, sort of like you'd hear like the National Review, which is very conservative, but tends to be a little protectionist. They were like, they're not even worried about this in Ukraine. Why should we be worried about this? Whereas, others were really like, Yeah, they're going in. They don't have 200,000 soldiers there for nothing. I mean, they've called up the conscripts and all this other stuff, and so it was very confusing. And anyway,
I think we have to separate being worried about it and panicked about it to understanding that there is a good possibility that's going to happen and not creating a panic around it. So I think the Ukrainian government took the position of, we know this is going to happen, and we're pretty sure it's going to, we can't guarantee it, but we think it's going to happen, but we can't set in a mass panic before it actually starts. So, I think there was a little bit of a mix of that, but of course we'll never really know the whole story.
Right. Well, that's a very Eastern European trait. It's prepare for the worst, hope for the best, in that order.
Yes.
that sort of thing. I'm part whatever. I think it's part Russian, but it could be Ukrainian for all I know. Because my family's no good that way. So I always say that's the Russian in me, but now I'm going to just say it's the Eastern European in me that has the same attitude. But
where's your family from?
No, but my family is terrible about this. So they'll say Russian, German, Austrian, Hungarian. Who's from where? I think maternal, Austria, Germany, paternal, more Hungarian, Russian, but Russia was the Soviet Union then. So
my guess is it's probably Ukrainian. It's probably Ukrainian because Ukraine was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire for a long time, and there's been a lot of.
I think all four of my grandparents were born in the United States. Now, I don't think any of my great grandparents are, but I don't even know that for sure. This is, if my family's listening live, shame on you. But nobody's here to hear about my shit, because I really don't even know. I wish I did. I did the ancestry DNA test. It just came back 100% European. That's it. They just did a giant circle that kept out the very southern parts, the most northern parts, and the rest was a circle. Maybe like part of Spain was excluded. Everything else in play. So anyway, also something I forgot to ask, because I vaguely remember that when you were in Ukraine really early on, or at some point, like apparently you were involved with writing the Constitution.
It wasn't actually writing the Constitution, but when I first went over as a volunteer in 1992, it was with the advisory council to the Ukrainian parliament. And I was expecting to take my last week and do some tourism and vacation. And I got a call from my boss, or actually he wasn't my boss. He was the guy who actually started the Baker McKenzie office. He was the former executive secretary of this group. And I remember he called me in the apartment on the Sunday and he said, look, the new draft of the Constitution just came out and we need a quick translation of it. And, you won't be doing the actual translation, but can you proof it and put it all together for us? And I thought to myself, okay, this is it's going to be 20, 30 pages. It's a day or two job. I said, absolutely. I'll ride herd on it and make sure it's done. And I went into the office on Sunday and looked, and I believe it was 130 pages. And so basically spent my last week in Ukraine putting together the final touches on the whole translation, because there was a whole group of experts coming in to talk about the Constitution and what should be adopted.
Okay, so we cannot confirm that you are Ivan John Hakanovich.
No. I don't have the. Though I will say my first boss with Baker McKenzie, he was there with the advisory council of the Ukrainian parliament when they declared independence, and he's told the story that he actually, on the photocopier, copied the Declaration of Independence, because the group of parliamentarians came to his office and said, we want to declare independence tomorrow, and we need a resolution copied. And will you do this? And his first response was, well, certainly in Parliament you have, a photocopier or two. And they kind of looked at him and said, yeah, but we also have guys that will understand that this is coming out to the floor and we're not sure how they're going to respond. So on a single sheet photocopier, he sat there at night and printed 450 copies of this resolution so the parliamentarians could get it on the next day.
A little dated. Seems like it could have used an in Internoslav.
Yes.
I'm done with that stupid joke. So wife, kids, everyone's safe, right?
Everyone's safe.
Okay.
Well,
Now your wife,
wife's in Kiev right now, so
right.
we'll
Well,
see.
you picked her up, brought her back, and now she's gone back to Kiev from safety back to Kiev. Why?
Yes, she's still working full time there for a large multinational. We have personal property. We have real estate still there. There's a lot of things that needed to be taken care of. So she went over in the end of May to finish up her green card process, because even though she was supposed to be interviewed in Kyiv, once the war started, they said we're moving our consular section to Germany, and we had a choice of either switching the whole process to the U.S. process or keeping it outside of the U.S. and in the State Department process. We chose the latter. She went back to Europe, obtained her immigration visa, and then made a comment to me that, I need to get back to Kyiv and take care of a lot of things. Also, her father is living in downtown Kyiv, her sister, and we have a number of relatives. So she wanted to go back. And I said, well, it doesn't make any sense for you to fly back here and then a few weeks later fly back there. Why don't you go straight there? It took her all of, I think, 2 seconds to say fine. And she was looking at routes through Warsaw, how she could get back. She got back. She's been there about a month. She's going back out tomorrow or the day after.
Is it easier to get in than out? About the same?
I think it depends on timing. Right now, there's been about 5 million Ukrainians that have been displaced internally, and I think 2 to 3 million that have left. Now, there's a number that have left, but there's also hundreds of thousands that have migrated back across the border once things seem safer. So, I refer to them as Ukrainian displaced persons as opposed to refugees. It's people that are leaving because it's a war, not necessarily because they want to leave the country.
Right.
Men between the ages of 18 and I think 60 are not allowed to leave. So you basically have families that have women and children that have decided to leave. But that said, there's a great number of people that have stayed.
Sure.
So it's not everybody who has had a chance is looking just to run out of the country and get a ticket to Europe or get a ticket to the U.S.
Ukraine's a country of about 44 or 45 million.
Yeah, it was probably officially down to 42. 42 before the start of the war.
So after displacement, you're talking about people leaving and then some came back?
Yeah, it's probably a little below 40 right now.
Okay.
Probably a little below 40.
All right. So you're here in the U.S. and you're going from an attorney with a very impressive resume, but trying to set up roots in Ohio, job hunting, taking care of a teenager, balancing, a intercontinental relationship, and then figuring out that there's a war, and then figuring out, first, you obviously is concerned with the safety of your family. That happened, and then made a family decision for a part of your family to go back. And in the interim, you obviously are very devoted to Ukraine, and you're starting to get involved with tax exempts, nonprofits, or just causes that don't even really have that status yet. They're just trying to help. So talk about how that sort of originated, because I do want to spoil a little bit, because this isn't fiction, so we can spoil some, because Peter's gone from a mild-mannered lawyer to, or maybe not so mild-mannered, to lawyer to he's basically part of a legal arms dealer, or legally arms sourcer, finding military grade Kevlar and bulletproof vests and drones and so. If you didn't think it was so exciting up until now, it's going to get really interesting. So I want to find out how, the origin of how he got involved with the groups anyway, and how one thing turned from aid into military aid, and then how a dude who's in Ohio, who spent most of his time in other countries, How you find military grade equipment, and then how do you get it? You go to the UPS store and send it.
No. Yeah. Quite honestly, when I came back to the States last summer, I had a little bit of Ukraine fatigue, and was a little tired. When the war started, it happened on the day that my wife had just returned, and I got a call from a good friend from the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America, who I've worked with for a number of years. And UCCA is basically an umbrella organization of a bunch of Ukrainian diaspora groups here in the United States. Represents about 2 million Ukrainians throughout all of the U.S. through their various organizations. So my good friend Tamara calls me and she said, the war has started. We're a very small volunteer-based organization. Can you help me out? And I was too concerned about my wife, and I first said no, and then felt really bad the next morning. And I called her and I said, "What can I do?" And UCCA, which is traditionally a pure advocacy group, was doing humanitarian aid. It was doing medical aid, IFACs, and it just so happened that one of my close friends, actually the godfather of my child, my 15-year-old, who I brought over here, who was let's just say he's well-to-do. He was a governor, and he was deputy governor of Kharkiv Oblast. He was the governor of Sumy Oblast. And when the war started, he went into the military. He had served before in Afghanistan in the 1980s, and he thought it was his duty. Sent his wife and kids out of country and went to the front lines. And so Tamara, he gave me a call, told me what he was doing, and I said, I'm heading up a territorial defense unit here, which still falls under the military. But I said, so what do you have? He says, I have a battalion of about 550 million people, 550 million Ukrainians, and can I send you a list of what I need?
550, not 550 million.
No, 550. And it was basically everything from socks to level 4 bulletproof vests and etc.
Was he in the military before?
Yes, he served in Afghanistan, 2 tours in the 1980s.
Was he active duty Ukrainian military when?
I don't think so, but he's well trained and well armed. So he had no. It wasn't somebody just stumbled into there and say, I want to serve. It was somebody.
I accept that, but how does it happen? Does the military say, hey, you're a reservist, or did he call up and say, I want to help? I mean, or did it just sort of happen organically where he said, I'm a veteran, let me do my thing?
He's an Afghan veteran. He's been close to the Afghan veterans, who served with him, and he came up and said, I'm willing to fight and I'm willing to lead. They saw that he had talent and had experience and said, absolutely. I mean, he was a governor of an oblast in Ukraine and a deputy governor in the Kharkiv Oblast. So he's there. I get this letter, and Tamara from Ukrainian Congress Committee of America happens to be the godmother of the same child. So I called her immediately and I said, hey, Vasa has sent us has sent this letter. Can we help him out? And she said, well, we can't do lethal stuff because of our 501c3 status, but whatever we can do, we're willing to, I'm willing to help out. So we kind of took it upon ourselves to make a personal kind of campaign for Battalion 228 out in Kharkiv. I had no qualms of going to friends, family, anybody that would listen and say, can you give money? And I know exactly where it's going. I guarantee you we're not taking a cut. We get no administrative fee. We're going to buy stuff and we're going to get it over there. the first need was kind of level 4 vests and helmets. Now UCCA had a license for, or was in the process of getting a license for level 3, but as I quickly learned, that's not what was needed on the front lines for certain caliber shells that were being used by Russian snipers. So
what's the difference between level 3 and level 4, if you can explain it at all?
It's basically the caliber of shell that it will withstand. Okay. Level 3 is great, but there are some sniper rifles. I think it's 7.63 millimeter that armor piercing that will go through a level 3. So, and that's what the Russians were using.
What is your standard, you're near Cleveland, what does your standard Cleveland police officer tactical use? What level?
I don't know, but I would guess it's level 3.
Okay.
Level 4. Level 4 requires a different. So basically, I started sourcing in Europe and in Ukraine.
You make it sound so simple. What does that mean? You started sourcing?
It's calling people that you know and trust and saying, who can find me something, who knows somebody. And we had a number of vests and helmets that were sourced through a Czech company that were coming from Israel. So they were able to procure those and send them over. And then there's a wonderful fund in Ukraine called Ukrainian Freedom Fund, and it's an old friend of mine from Ukraine. And I called him and I said, hey Andy, I know you guys are making vests. Can you help me out? And he gave me the first level 4 vests kind of gratis. He said, look, they're not certified. He says, but I'm former Marine, and I have a bunch of U.S. experts over here. I tell you they're level 4. So he gave us the first 50 gratis. We sent them over to the battalion. They tested them themselves and they said, Peter, these vests are great. So then we wound up buying another 250 of them from him.
How much does a vest cost? And where are you sending them? I mean, are there functional post offices and deliveries?
One group of vests was actually sourced in Ukraine. The other one, and to be honest, we did have some glitches. We got a first order that went through without any glitches, and then we had a second order that went through a different European country. No, it went through the same country. I think the second one also went through Poland, but there were some glitches and we kind of had to send them back out and then send them back in. We had to make a number of phone calls to Ukrainian representatives, about who these guys were, where they were going, that it was all legit, that it wasn't going to be sold off to the Russians. And it was basically a scramble of nobody. Look, there's no logistic line set up on this. It was like, how are we going to do this? And then let's figure it out. And then we got a request for night vision. We sent over, I think.
Wait. We haven't. So it was sent by trucks, guys in trucks.
Trucks, yeah.
Okay. And how much does like one level 4 vest and helmet cost? We can do the math afterwards ourselves.
Yeah, we got a kit from the Israeli ones. I think the vest and helmet were about $700 a kit. So for the vest and helmet, $750, $850 a kit. We basically spent on one supplier of $250,000,
right,
and then the Ukrainian supplier was much cheaper. They were able to supply the vest for about $300 a vest.
Less shipping costs also.
Well, that was a little easier because they were actually being made in Ukraine. So
right.
The shipping cost was all rolled in. The night vision was also, I think, the first group. We went back to them and ordered a bunch of night vision. And then we had a deal come in to Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. and a very well-known drones expert from the U.S., Brett Velikovich, came to us and said, I can get these real high-end drones over here in the U.S. And get them over to Ukraine and get them out to the front lines. And I think UCCA spent about $250,000 on that.
Now, how'd they get around the we can't do anything of violence? Did they say they were defensive, or
they were defensive.
Okay, so they're defensive. Okay,
of course.
Vests and helmets are definitely defensive. What drones for reconnaissance?
We also, I had the good fortune of meeting up with very early during when the war started. A woman here for Ohio for Ukrainians. She called me and asked me if I wanted to be on the local TV show, kind of talk about the family separation. And then we started talking, and I told her about Battalion 228. She went into a big donor at one point for humanitarian aid reasons, kind of pitched the battalion and walked out. And I took a little funny story. I took a call while getting my hair washed, getting a haircut. And, and it was the donor on the line along with her. And he had a couple of questions, and I answered the questions. She calls me a half hour later and said, Peter, I have a check for $250,000 in my pocket. I'm going to go deposit it. And he said, use it for Battalion 228. I'm getting stuff from the front lines. I'm guaranteeing people that this stuff is going to somebody on the front lines. And it's not an easy pitch, but it's a lot easier pitch to make than, we're just generally supporting somebody, And so we had a bunch of drones just that were flown in. I think there were 22 in all. We also had a big donor in New York he was a Ukrainian diaspora, and I contacted him about a number of things, and he was talking to his own people and says, I think these drones are a better bang for their buck. I said,
defensive bang.
No, we've with certain monies have delivered stuff that will provide a very nice bang. I'm happy to say that in Turkey we had
outside of the UCCA or whatever.
Correct. But we had two large drones that were bought, I believe it was Greece, and reconfigured and tested, and were just delivered this past weekend. So I haven't seen film from that yet, but my commander assured me that they're there, and he was very happy that we were able to deliver them.
That brings up another question. Do you get, we're getting, in the beginning, we were getting, numbers and figures and film, and as the war sort of ground down, and as things happened here, Roe v. Wade, the gun cases, mass shootings, primaries, we're starting to get less and less. What's going on? What is the situation on the ground? What's the morale like? I can listen to General Jacobs and Wesley Clark and all these people talk about anything, but it seems to me that you probably have as good, if not better, information than they do.
I think it's fairly obvious that the Russians thought that this would be a 1 week, blitzkrieg and take over Kyiv, the capital city. And then it became fairly obvious that they were not well trained, disorganized, bad supply lines, bad communications. And what they've done over the past probably month and a half is really focused the war on eastern Ukraine and also southern Ukraine, trying to create a whole land bridge to cut off all of Ukraine's ports. Not getting a lot of statistics out of there. I think for various reasons, the Ukrainian government is pretty guarded about their statistics. It's gotten pretty bad over the past 3-4 weeks, with Ukrainians taking a lot of shelling. I asked my commander, I said, well, what about this great, U.S. hardware that's coming in? And he just chuckled and he says, I haven't seen any of it. That's one thing. And then the other issue that I've heard is that Ukrainians, even if they get the long range artillery, they're not allowed to shoot over the Russian border.
Why?
Well, because certain elements here politically are scared. So it might just be a diplomatic kind of charade of, we're not antagonizing Russia. We're not authorizing this. We're not doing this. I think the US
them. They invaded.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jeff. But it's we've seen the policy here.
Is it external pressures or is it internal? Is it like the U.S. and Europe saying don't do it, or is it internally?
Yes. No, it's the U.S. and Europe saying. I mean, when I spoke to my commander a few weeks ago, he says we're ready to march to Moscow if we have to. It's we're not stopping. So the morale is right now extremely defiant. Ukrainians are posed that they're going to win this war, and I actually asked, would there be any talk about negotiations? And I heard a couple. I heard one comment that was the president, if the Ukrainian president decided he was going to negotiate right now from a losing position, we'd march in there and take care of him. So they're there for the long haul. They're there for the fight, and they're not giving up. They're not asking for foreign troops, though there's been a number of them that have not official troops, but volunteers from foreign countries that have come in. And they're just saying, give us the weapons, we'll do the fighting, give us the support that we need, and we'll take care of the Russians. As crazy as it sounds, I think it can be a reality. So they know they're in for a long haul. So we're going to keep trying to support, both on the military side, and I've also this past weekend taken a little bit of a pivot, not complete pivot. I'm trying to keep my hands in everything, but one of my good friends is started a foundation called Move Ukraine, where they're taking in displaced persons and trying to build homes and, let's just say, communities in regions in the West, not just slop up some prefab homes or some boxes, but to actually rehabilitate areas, provide services that will be needed, such as education, psychiatric services, job training, and try to build out communities, because we've had 5 million Ukrainians move from the east and the south that are war zones, and now they have to be housed somewhere in Western Ukraine. So the war is going to keep going, but the winter, we know, is going to be there come October, November.
Right. All right. So way back when I asked you about sourcing, you said, well, I just call people who can help. And I don't want you to name any names if you don't want to, or companies or whatever, but what type of call? What is it? Because you knew people or companies from your work as an international lawyer, that you knew certain defense contractors or suppliers?
No.
Like what's the first call what's the first type of call you make? Again, don't say any names, but go, I knew a retired general. I mean,
No. It was much more grassroots than that. I was introduced to a company that's probably 10 minutes from my house here, that provides body armor. Actually, they just provide the plates. But I went in there and I was very honest with the guy, and he kind of looked at me and I said, I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. Okay. All I'm doing is I'm trying to put things together and, to make sure this stuff gets over into Ukraine. And, after about a half hour, I think he saw that I was serious. I wasn't trying to I wasn't trying to profit off of this. And he was very willing to share his stock of body armor, and then later on share contacts. That actually went nowhere other than a good relationship and a trusting relationship. I had a friend, Andy Bain, who had the Ukrainian Freedom Fund in Ukraine. He does, he has a company that does media, in Ukraine, but he's a former Marine. So I contacted him. I had another friend in Facebook that I saw was importing vests that I'd known for a long time in Ukraine, an American who lived in Ukraine. So I contacted him. I had friends reaching out to me and saying, actually, the first batch of vests that we bought, I bought because another Ukrainian diaspora volunteer from UCCA's Albany branch had bought from this supplier, and I was told he had bought from this supplier, and he thinks they're good and they're legit. So it was really just word of mouth. I mean, I had the Peter Chernyshev's wife was, sourcing me things out of Sweden and other areas, because she had lived in Europe, and people just started talking and asking. So you're basically trying to put together people that you trusted, that you knew weren't going to profit off of it or screw you, to put you together with somebody else. And there was always a leap of faith, at the end, because you send somebody money, it's overseas, and whether or not they deliver or not, you don't know if it's going to happen, but if you heard that you pass around the good word, and it's okay, these are trusted suppliers. But there's always going to be hiccups. It's always going to be a leap of faith. But it's basically going on. It's not calling the generals and they have, these are our guys that will supply you quietly. That we won't tell you about.
What is the complaint on the ground from the battalion commander or other sources you have in Ukraine about the West and their response, if anything, or what is there something else that could be done by the rest of the world? Forget just the West, anyone that isn't being done, and you can treat those as two separate questions if you like. However you want.
I think on the one hand they're thankful for what they've gotten, but on the other hand it's we need things faster, and we need more and more capabilities. We need the longer range, heavier artillery. We need multi rocket systems. The idea of close the skies of in Ukraine, the Russian Air Force is much greater than the Ukrainian Air Force. So guns that could defend against that.
Anti-aircraft batteries,
anti-aircraft guns, also guns that can defend against the ships that Russia has parked in the Black Sea, and that also not only are doing military stuff, but I think one of the things that the world really needs to understand is it's not coming in as a military operation. It's basically Russia is taking this on as basically trying to commit a genocide, doing everything from having military tactics that involve bombing of hospitals, bombing of schools, raping of women, killing of children, taking grain out and stealing grain and shipping, blocking Ukrainian ports so nothing can be shipped out from an economic side, blocking off humanitarian aid from cities that have been surrounded by the Russian military. So the Russians are basically playing by different rules than traditional civil military rules. And I think there has to be a continued pressure by everybody from the West, and it involves more military aid, absolutely, but it also involves more and more diplomatic isolation and diplomatic pressure against Russia, and it involves continuing more and more sanctions against Russia.
What is the view from the Ukraine position on, like, what is China doing? In the beginning, it looked like they weren't doing anything. Then they seemed to be cozying up to Russia. But it seemed, I don't know if that went any further than lip service. I mean, are they just sort of sitting this one out, or are they, aside from buying gas, what's the perception?
My perception is China gave the kind of silent okay to Putin to do this and stood by watching to see how the rest of the world would react. Was extremely shocked when Russia really failed in their first months. We have to remember, Putin was planning a May Day parade on May 9th in the streets of Kyiv. And that never happened. And then there was talk about, whether or not they'll do a parade to, at least celebrate their wins in the East. That never happened. And so I think Russia kind of took China, and China always takes a long view on everything. So they kind of sat back and watched to see what the reaction would be. And have they been completely neutral? No, they're going to go after their own self-interest. They're buying Russian oil and gas at a discounted price to benefit the Chinese. But are they backing Russia? No, I don't think they're going to be backing them militarily. And, I think they're just biding their time to see how this all settles out. But again, it's been a pleasant surprise. And, for as much as criticism that I have and what the U.S. administration has done with respect to the war and their speed and all, one of the things that has happened at the expense of tens of thousands of Ukrainian lives and billions and billions of dollars of destruction is that Europe has kind of woken up, and I can't say they're fully together right now, but they've realized Germany has always played. Russia has always played a big card with respect to energy, saying Ukraine's not a reliable partner, and that's why we got to build Nord Stream 2. And I tell people, you can talk what you want about the different administrations. Ukraine was invaded under the Obama administration. I was there. Ukraine wasn't invaded under the Trump administration. And Ukraine actually got lethal weapons during the Trump administration, which it didn't get. Obama would not release lethal weapons. And then when Biden came in, one of the big things that he did was he said, we're going to let Nord Stream 2 be finished. And there's the argument, well, it was 95% or 90% finished. Yeah, but you can't run a pipeline that's 95% finished. It's either complete or it's not complete. You can ship gas through it or you can't ship gas through it. And, the second or third day of office, he gave the go-ahead, which then the Germans took as a signal of, okay, we're going to get cheap Russian gas and we're worried about our self-interest. Now the Germans have really come around to the point where they're giving lethal weapons, which they didn't at the beginning. They're shifting their whole energy policy to try to cut out Russia. And I think you really see that from a lot of the European nations. We have now Finland and Sweden that want to go into NATO. You have Ukraine that's been approved as, I forget the exact title. They're not in the EU, but they have.
We're looking at a fast track.
Yeah, they're going to work on a fast track, and they've at least given the nod, to work on getting into the EU. So there's a lot of things because of the suffering that Ukraine's had to endure over the past 4 months, and which will last for many years. But there's been a lot of kind of reshifting in the global politics and the global view that, Russia is a country that should be worked with, and it is okay. We just have to work and understand them. To look, they have a different mentality, and they have a different view of the world, and they don't care about rule of law, and they're willing just to go in and bomb another country and take because they think it should be theirs. So.
Right, and at this point, it looks like Putin doesn't want to be embarrassed more than anything else.
Putin should be embarrassed. He should be embarrassed so much that he gets put out, in my view.
Well, I'm not against that either. I want you to address this because in the beginning, and it held some purchase here in certain corners, that the Russians were talking about how there was Ukrainian provocation. There were Nazis in Ukraine, as if there's not Nazis everywhere. There's Nazis in Ohio. That it was NATO encroachment. There were all sorts of provocations, and that led to the war. And I'd like you to address them. I don't want to put any words into your mouth or thoughts into your head. I mean, what is the position of? I mean, several times you said that there was an invasion started in 2014, and here we call it an annexation because no one wants to say it was an invasion of sovereign territory. But what's the Ukraine?
Back in 2014, Obama wouldn't even allow the diplomats to use the words Russian aggression, because one of the things that Russia has been really good at for not just this past year, but for decades, they're really good at trying to create a false narrative on a lot of issues. So they'll create this narrative, and they're convinced that if they keep saying it enough times, some people will kind of start to buy into it. So you get this: oh, Ukraine is a bunch of is a bunch of Nazis, and you kind of step back and say, well, factually, Ukraine is the only country other than Israel to have both a president and a prime minister that are both Jewish at the same time. At the same time, we currently have a president that is a Jewish president. It is not a Nazi state. Are there people that are crazy on the right? Sure, there are. There's everywhere. Like I said, in Ohio, Maryland, we can always find crazy people that are crazy on the left. Yeah, but as a state, as a modern state, there is none of that. But Russia kind of keeps playing these different lines in hopes that somebody will bite and somebody will either agree with them. And the other thing that they do really well is they'll try to create division on any kind of argument. So it's well known, maybe not well known, but back in the 2016 elections here in the United States, Russia was supporting groups that were from BLM to right-wing U.S. Nazi groups, because they want division, they want chaos everywhere else. So people are arguing on the other in their country, and then meanwhile they're going to do what they want and keep pushing their message, and hope that somebody buys. And to this administration's credit, one of the things that they've done well is they've gotten in front of Russia, and right from the beginning they say, we're going to have these false flags, we're going to have these accusations, we're going to have Russia saying A, B, and C, and now so nobody takes it as seriously. The RT, I think it was originally Russian television or Russian Today, and then it was RT network, that they built out for hundreds of millions of dollars throughout the world, put on cable TV stations, here in the U.S., try to make it look like a legitimate news program, but it was basically Russian propaganda, and they're extremely good at it. They work on it. Russia funds the Green Movement in Germany, so get the Germans to shut down their nuclear power plants because it's not a good thing. Not because they care about the environment, it's because they want to ship in their gas. So we'll fund these groups that are actually working in our interest, without making it seem like it. But it's look. Ukraine is a very safe, very democratic nation. Are there pockets of racism, anti-Semitism, somebody being against LGBTQ, groups? Sure, there's always going to be, but it's pockets of it. It's not something that is state-run as it is in Russia. Where in Russia, if Putin and the state says you're going to act this way, then they all act that way. And then the worst thing not the worst thing, but one of the worst things that they do is they utilize the Russian Orthodox Church, to basically spread this message in. And the Putin philosophy is, the Russians are kind of the pure soul of, Orthodoxy Christianity, right. And we're the ones that are suffering. So, yeah, we're blaming NATO for encroaching in on our country, where it's like, no, NATO's not encroaching into Russia. NATO has no desire to take any parts of Russia. And both NATO and Europe have always taken the view that, Ukraine is a democratic state, and if as a democracy they want to join NATO or the EU, and they and they meet our certain criteria and they reform in a certain way, we'll look at possibly accepting them. It's not like they've gone in and NATO comes in and says we're going to take out Ukraine and put them in
Right.
and put them in.
Yeah. Anyone who has studied European and world history, if you go back probably 1,200 years, you'll see that Russia, for a country that thinks that it is the original and the purest source of people, has always wanted to be someone else. They've always wanted to be the new Rome. For a while, they wanted to be the new France and Napoleon, but just decided that was just a different version of Rome. But they've always wanted to be something else, but it was always them at the top. That is an enormous oversimplification of over a millennia. But it's
about 1,200 years, Jeff. Actually, there was no Moscow.
No, I know there wasn't even Russia then. For a while, it was St. Petersburg, Kyiv, or Kyiv Rus.
It was existing as a flourishing city, and Moscow was basically what's.
No, I know. It's just the region. I can't even remember the guy's name, but he dealt with the Vikings for a while. Anyway, so all right. Is there anything else that you want or need to tell us? Because I have a couple. First of all, if anybody wants to help, what are the names of the organizations, or how did they get in touch with you? How do they support the cause? And come closer to the camera because we're having a little. You've been choppy a little bit.
Well, there's a couple groups. Of course, the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. If you Google the website. I think they have a Mighty Cause donation. If you want to do a bigger check or whatever, you can send a check. It's on their website. Another group that I've kind of latched onto over the past week or so is called Move Ukraine, in which we're going to be building houses and communities in Western Ukraine to support the internally displaced people. It was basically created by a very good friends of mine, a husband and wife that have been in Ukraine for many a year. So absolutely legitimate cause. The money is going to be used well in Ukraine, and that's called Move Ukraine. That's recently formed. And then general donations, Ukrainian Congress Committee of America.
And that would, and there was one that you said was for humanitarian help. If someone didn't want to help with the military, is that
give it to Move Ukraine. Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. We do everything from humanitarian to supporting territorial defense.
You mentioned earlier that you were trying to get a license. What kind of license does one get? Does one look for to import defensive military grade equipment?
We were looking.
I can't hear you.
We were looking basically on body armor at that time for level 4 body armor. Other stuff that we've imported, we've basically paid for groups that have the licenses and abilities to bring it in. But another new project that I've recently assisted on, the city of Miami just did a big gun buyback, and I have another close friend in Ukraine that was kind of thinking ahead about 3 months ago and formed a group here with the specific purposes of receiving guns and munitions, either as donations from members or cash contributions, and they'll do it. And he has received a license. I have it right here, an absolutely legitimate license.
Who's it from?
Rifles, pistols, magazines, parts, magazines, shotguns, ammunition. So,
who issued that?
What's that?
What department of government issued that?
The United States Department of Commerce.
Oh, so it's the Commerce Department that you go to ship weapons. And
I didn't know that, but he he started this. He started with this idea. He came to me. I said, "Oh, I'm really. This is really out of my lane." And then when Miami announced that they were doing a gun buyback and that they were going to give them to Ukraine, I contacted somebody, and I said, "Do they know how they're going to give them to Ukraine? Because you can't just, can't just put them on
I
a
thought
boat."
it would be Department of Defense, Department of State. I mean,
I thought so
what
too.
Commerce Department does. Now we know.
I thought so too. So he on if anybody has contacts into whether it's police department, NRA groups, rifle lovers, any associations that wants to consider giving giving over some weapons that will be we'll organize and pay for the shipping and getting them out.
Reformed insurrectionists who want to make amends.
Yeah. So they can contact they can contact you, and then you can contact me, and we'll make it go. But it'll be much appreciated. It will be much appreciated. Since I've started, I've been kind of all over the board here, but they're all for good causes, and it's all with people that.
By the way, I don't know that anyone will, but you can contact me if you don't want to contact Peter directly, and I will contact him. I'm happy to do whatever small part I can or will. I have a now you said you were job hunting. I assume that's sort of on a hiatus or sort of on a back burner, but have you thought about not getting a job, but becoming an international arms dealer, merchant, or broker?
My 15-year-old thinks that would be the absolute coolest thing in the world. But he's been pushing me on it. And I'm telling him that's not really my game. I would much rather go into economic development over in Ukraine. But in the meantime, we're going to do what we can.
Well, you'll have your chance to do economic development there, hopefully sooner rather than later, and plenty of it. But yeah, I mean, I guess you'd rather be Black Panther than Ulysses Claw, but I don't know. But what was that movie with Nicolas Cage, the Gods of War or something?
All
right. So international arms dealer, probably not on your wish list of things.
No.
If you're still looking for a job, what are you looking for on the off chance there's someone listening or in this connection that knows somebody or has interest in your particular Liam Neeson skill set?
Yeah, I've been looking kind of for high level economic development. Moving into kind of project work in Ukraine, whether it's on the private business side that sees opportunity over in Ukraine on a lot of different industries, any kind of aid groups, that want to get stuff done, and actually deliver things into Ukraine. Policy advisement and advocacy has always been, something that I'd enjoy.
Well, you've got a drone, and so you can get their mall built.
Yeah.
All right. I can't thank you enough. I mean, I don't think that people know how much of an ordeal you and your family have been through, and you don't show it on your face. You don't hear it in your voice. Maybe that's the Eastern European in you as well. But I know, I've heard, I've seen and read, I've different tones in various posts and things like that. And so, I don't know what to say. Hats off to you for going through this. Sorry you have to go through all this, but it seems like, you got a ball or a baton reluctantly, but you've, been breaking world records with it ever since. So keep doing what you can do. I don't have much money. I don't have much reach, but whatever I have is, is at your disposal. And hopefully some of the people that I've asked if they're interested will make some contact with you, or you'll make contact with them and, get to other audiences as well around the world. Is there any last messages you want to say, or have we covered the bases?
I think we've covered the bases, but I truly want to thank you for your past support. This isn't something that, even though we didn't see each other for a long time after law school, since the war started, Jeff has been in regular contact, asking me about what's going on. So I really appreciate this opportunity that you're giving me here, and to reach out to the wider audience, and to the audience. I'd just like to say thank you for any support that you've given. Please keep it up. This isn't going to end soon, unfortunately, but Ukraine still needs your support, and in the end, Ukraine will win. So, thank you.
Slava Ukraini.
Slava Ukraini. Heroям слава.
All right. Thanks again, Peter. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Please, spread the word. If you hear this, spread this to other people. Even if you hate me, even if you don't like the other shows, just spread the message and share it. So with that, we will hear you next week, probably on Garden Doom, or you'll hear us. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.
All right, Jimmy, that's a wrap whenever you're...
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Байрактар.